Welcome to the SOD TV's daily review of the Warcraft Logs of Season of Discovery's current raid, No Mergone. We will be going through the top 10 DPS per class and spec for March 18th. Let's dive into it. First, we're focusing on the balanced Druid class and the top players who are making waves in the current raid. We've seen some interesting shifts in the leaderboard. Yesterday, Innate from Crusader Strike, US in the Guild Humbertism, held the top spot with a DPS of 528.8 and item level 43. But today, Adri from Crusader Strike, US in the Guild Valhalla and Pals has taken the lead with a DPS of 548.9 and item level 41. Innate is now in second place, while Drolzu from Living Flame, EU in the Guild Rats, maintains their third position with a DPS of 505.7 and item level 43. It's worth noting that despite the shift in placements, the DPS and item levels of Innate and Drolzu have remained consistent. Now, let's quickly run through the remaining top 10. In fourth place, we have Aud from Living Flame, followed by Epis and Talang both from Living Flame. Key Druid from Wild Growth, which in 7th place, while Chump John from Crusader Strike, IK, holds the 8th spot. Shot Kafer from Chaos Bolt, EU and Flighty from Lone Wolf US down round out the list in 9th and 10th place respectively. Next, we're diving into the Feral Druid class today, and there's been some exciting movement on the leaderboard. Yesterday, Sionsu from Crusader Strike US and the Guild Ale and Peels held the top spot with a DPS of 486.1 and an item level of 40. Doc Insider from Living Flame EU was hot on his tail in second place with a DPS of 480.1 and an item level of 43, while Blaney from Crusader Strike US and the Guild Exhausted rounded out the top 3 with a DPS of 475.0 and an item level of 41. Today, however, we have a new leader, and from Crusader Strike US and the Guild Dun has surged to the top with a DPS of 487.2 and an item level of 42. Sionsu has held his ground, maintaining his DPS and item level to stay in second place, while Doc Insider remains steady in third. The rest of the top 10 has seen some shifts. Blaney has slipped to fourth, while Venus from Living Flame, Huibras climbed to 5th. Gutsbuller from Living Flame, EU is holding strong in 6th, and Portism from Crusader Strike, EUC has moved up to 7th. Big Pogdruid from Living Flame, EU has dropped to 8th, while NMX from Lone Wolf, Wolfie C has made a leap to 9th. Finally, Ginny from Crusader Strike, UC, rounds out the top 10. Next, we're focusing on the Guardian Druid class, and we've got some interesting shifts in the leaderboard. Holding strong at the top for another day is Shrifty Cat from Living Flame, US, in the Guild Magnum Gallus, still dealing a DPS of 348.8 with an item level of 41. Rediscover from Wild Growth, AEE, in the Guild Discovery channel, maintains the second spot with a DPS of 329.7 and item level 43. And from Gulang, WTIW, we have Dali Wee. We have Dani Wande in the Guild Daligie, holding onto third place with a DPS of 328.3 and item level 42. Now, let's take a quick look at the rest of our top 10. Jasty from Lone Wolf, AU is in 4th place, followed by Sunmi from Godahan Nukday, KAR, in 5th. Fakshufa from Lone Wolf, EU is in 6th, with What's This from Lone Wolf, AU right behind in 7th. Siloai from Lone Wolf, AU is in 8th. Colpedruid from Living Flame, EU is in 9th, and rounding out our top 10 is Fatal Root from Crusader Strike. Now, let's dive into the current state of the Melee Hunter class. Holding strong at the top spot, we have Zatara from Crusader Strike, US in the Guild, Die High, maintaining his DPS of 620.1 and item level 42. Zatara's consistency is truly remarkable as he's held this position since yesterday. In the second spot, we have Many Arrows from Lone Wolf, US, in the Guild Chinese Textile Machine. His DPS is 592.4 with an item level of 43, also unchanged from yesterday. Rounding out the top 3, we have Krusty Mill from Living Flame, AU with a DPS of 589.4 and item level 44. Like the top 2, Krusty Milf's stats remain the same as yesterday. Now, let's quickly run through the rest of today's top 10. In 4th place, we have Yangla Chichi from Shengming Lion Gem, followed by Strikey Club from Lone Wolf US in 5th. Lopez da Costa from Living Flame EU is in 6th, with Yarteli Isinuo from Gulang in 7th. Hunt Remains from Living Flame EU is in 8th, followed by Farm Vamphi from Lone Wolf EU in 9th. Finally, in 10th place, we have Visca from Living Flame. Next, we're focusing on the Ranged Hunter class. Let's dive right into the current top 10 players. Holding strong at the top spot is Punny from Living Flame EU, maintaining yesterday's DPS of 514.4 and item level 42. Loki, also from Living Flame AU, has climbed up to the 2nd spot with a DPS of 474.1 and an item level of 43, overtaking Sure Shocks from Crusader Strike US, who now sits at 3rd place with a DPS of 471.8 and item level 42. Now, let's quickly run through the rest of the top 10. At number 4, we have Floramelons from Lone Wolf US, followed by yesterday's 3rd placer, Monifortum from Living Flame EE at 5th. Nelf Hunter from Lone Wolf EU is at 6th, with Nimrol from Crusader Strike EU at 7th. Gardilu from Wild Growth EU 2 is at 8th. Aralinx from Crusader Strike US is at 9th, and rounding out the top 10 is Duerk from Lone Wolf EU. Next, we're focusing on the Arcane Mages who are making waves in the current raid. Let's dive right in. Holding strong at the top spot is Arcaniment from Wild Growth in the US, representing the guild Heroic Trash, with a DPS of 458.6 and an item level of 42. Coming in a close second is Muju from Gulang in Taiwan, representing the guild Duya Plus, with a DPS of 457.7 and an item level of 41. Muju is hot on Arcaniment's heels, also holding steady from yesterday. Rounding out the top 3 is Heatstroke from Living Flame in the EU, who, despite having a slightly higher item level of 43, trails with a DPS of 443.3, mirroring yesterday's stats. Now, let's quickly run through the rest of today's top 10. At number 4, we have Quan Shui from Gulang in Taiwan, followed by Salam Aleikum and Wood, both from Living Flame in the EU at 5th and 6th respectively. Kalik from Crusader Strike in the US is at 7th, while Zephside, also from Living Flame in the EEW, takes the 8th spot. Gaia Tablast from Crusader Strike in the US is at 9th, and finally, Earthor from Crusader Strike in the EU wraps up our top 10. Let's dive right into the Fire Mage leaderboard. Holding steady at the top spot is Hanzi from Shengming Lean Lion TW, representing the guild Peace and Love, with an DPS of 654.8 and an item level of 43. Hanzi continues to set the bar high, maintaining this position from yesterday. Kiznim from Living Flame AU in the guild Beef Bar is still hot on Hanzi's heels at 2nd place with a DPS of 638.0 and an item level of 41. Rounding out the top 3 is Lullus from Lone Wolf AU. Despite not being in a guild, Lullus is proving to be a force to be reckoned with, boasting a DPS of 630.1 and an item level 43. Now, let's quickly touch on the rest of today's top 10. We have Chaff from Living Flame AU at 4th, NY from Crusader Strike US at 5th, Rainy from Living Flame EU at 6th, Sonatic from Living Flame EEU at 7th, Vilk from Living Flame EU at 8th, Lance from Goguhan Nuke Day KR at 9th, and finally, Escardos from Crusader Strike US at a 10th. Next, we're diving straight into the heart of the action with the Frost Mage class. Holding the top spot, we have Laser Shark from Wild Growth US in the Guild Imperium, dealing a whopping 445.0 DPS with an item level of 43. That's a new face at the top, folks. Yesterday's leader, Wu Yi from Ga Lang TW in the Guild Kai Fu Yu Mei Ye, has slipped to the 2nd spot, maintaining his DPS of 439.7 and item level 43. Rounding out the top 3, we have Taiwan from Crusader Strike US with a DPS of 436.8 and item level 42. Now let's quickly run through the rest of today's top 10. We have Cyril from Living Flame US at number 4, followed by Watersoft from Crusader Strike EE at number 5. Freak Zone from Living Flame AU is holding the 6th spot while Anti-Zerk from Lone Wolf EU is at number 7. Cuties from Living Flame EE is at 8. From Lone Wolf US is at 9. And finally, Balasto from Living Flame EU wraps up our top 10. Up next, let's dive into the Protection Paladin class and see how our top players are performing. Holding strong in the top spot today, we have Ford from Shengming Liyan TW in the guild Chuan Chengji, maintaining his DPS of 526.2 and item level 44 from yesterday. This consistent performance shows Fort's mastery of the Protection Paladin class. In second place, we see a slight increase in DPS from HeMeiCu, also from Shengming Liyan TW in the guild Chuan Chengji, moving up from 488.5 to 491.8 DPS, while maintaining an item level of 44. This boost has allowed HeMeiCi to secure his position in the top 3. Breaking into the top 3 today, we have Tai Li IOC Fu Ding from Yexing Quan Yu TW with a DPS of 488.9 and item level 43. This is a notable achievement, especially considering the competitive nature of the top ranks. The rest of the top 10 are Bopt, Duyus, Shock, Milocyrus, Fuckyaz, Vaxim and Heal This, each demonstrating impressive stats and gameplay. Next, we're focusing on the Retribution Paladin class and the top players making waves in the current raid. Holding strong at the top of the leaderboard is Hoff from Wild Growth in the EUE. Hoff has maintained his position from yesterday with a DPS of 571.0 and an item level of 43. Coming in second today is Juboy, also from Wild Growth in the EU, Boo, who's made a jump up the ranks. Juboy is part of the Guild Gamers and has a DPS of 568.3 and an item level of 44. Eosphora from Living Flame in the EU has slipped into third place, maintaining a DPS of 565.4 and an item level of 43. As for the rest of the top 10, we've seen some movement. Shangjiang King from Gulang in Taiwan has dropped to 4th place, followed by Jaja Jardin from Crusader Strike in the US at 5th. Sheng Guang from Gulang in Taiwan has secured the 6th spot, with Fadan from Lone Wolf in the EU coming in at 7th. Qi Yu from Shengming Liyan in Taiwan is holding the 8th spot, while Nicey from Shadow Strike in the AU and US regions has slipped to 9th. Rounding out the top 10 is Leighton from Living Flame in the EU. Next, let's dive right into the Shadow Priest rankings. Holding strong at the top spot for the second day in a row, we have Woju Peng Ji from Gulang on the Taiwan server, representing the guild Chen Feng Di. His DPS remains unchallenged at 532.1 with an item level of 43. Climbing up to the second spot is Miss Meng from Shengming Lai Yanei N, also on the Taiwan server, boasting a DPS of 504.4 and an item level of 43. Haptics from Crusader Strike on the US server, representing the guild BD, holds the third spot with a DPS of 495.8 and an item level of 43, the same as yesterday. Now, let's quickly run through the rest of today's top 10. We have Bad Class from Lone Wolf, Sivak Norris from Wild Growth, Method from Shadow Strike, Karamita from Wild Growth, Zhao Bushuan from Sheng Minglai Yen A, Smitzy from Living Flame, and Ale Code from Wild Growth. Next, we're focusing on the DPS Rogue class, and boy, do we have some exciting stats to share with you. Let's start with our reigning champion, Vida from Crusader Strike, in the Guild Apex. Vida is still holding strong at the top spot with a DPS of 486.1 and an item level of 43. This is the same DPS Vida had yesterday, showing a consistent performance. Right on Vida's heels is Ganku from Living Flame in the guild the facts are in. Ganku is maintaining the second spot with a DPS of 484.0 and an item level of 39. And rounding out our top 3 is Lashley Trash from Living Flame in the guild ADH'd with a DPS of 483.9 and an item level of 41. Now, let's quickly run through the rest of today's top 10. We have Ra from Crusader Strike at number 4, Narangha from Godohan Nugdea at 5, Zhu Shui Dai from Shengming Li Liyan at 6, Nukes from Shadow Strike at 7, Underface from Living Flame at 8, Heistatron from Living Flame at 9, and Damascus from Living Flame rounding out our top 10. Next, we're focusing on the Elemental Shaman class, and we've got some interesting shifts in the leaderboard. Holding steady at the top is Thank from Living Flame, US in the Guild Decades. Thank continues to dominate with a DPS of 571.2 and an item level of 41, maintaining this position from yesterday. But we've got a new face in the number 2 spot. Shox from Chaos Bolt AU in the Guild Kerala squad has surged up the ranks with a DPS of 540.7. Thank from Living Flame EU in the Guild Incognito rounds out the top 3 with a DPS of 538.9 and an item level of 40. Now, let's quickly touch on the rest of today's top 10. Mortitide from Wildgrowth US has slipped to the 4th spot, followed by Lucelli's from Wildgrowth US in 5th. Lihipiraka, Webu, and the Paint Train, all from Living Flame AU, hold the 6th, 7th, and 8th spots respectively. Best Jumper from Crusader Strike EEO is in 9th, and TMP from Crusader Strike US rounds out the top 10. Next, we are focusing on the Enhancement Shaman class and their current standings in the raid. Let's dive right in. Bozita from Living Flame EU in the guild, Just Pull Sod has taken the top spot today with a DPS of 636.5 and an item level of 43, a significant jump from yesterday's 3rd place. Ralibad from Living Flame EU in the guild, The Cause, yesterday's number 1, has held steady with a DPS of 622.0 and item level 43, but has been nudged down to the 2nd position. Ian from Crusader Strike US remains in the 3rd spot with a DPS of 617.4. Borderline from Crusader Strike EU has slipped to 4th, followed by Killy from Living Flame AU at 5th. The 6th spot is claimed by Axai Gem from Shen Ming Lai Yan TV, with Orko Korka from Lone Wolf HUE at 7th, Spinoza from Living Flame AU at 8th, Barsney from Lone Wolf U at 9th, and Yun Fei Gitsai C from Sheng Ming, Lai Yan, and Wee rounding. Next, we're focusing on the DPS Warlock class and the movers and shakers in the current raid scene. Let's start with our top 3. Tico from Shadow Strike in the Guild Angles has surged to the top spot with a DPS of 775.9 and an item level of 42, a significant leap from yesterday's leader. Interhawk from Lone Wolf in the Guild Wu-Tang, who is still holding strong in 2nd place with a DPS of 724.8 and an item level of 44. Actually, from Living Flame in the Guild Amandla rounds out the top 3, maintaining his position with a DPS of 701.0 and an item level of 44. Now, let's quickly run through the rest of today's top 10. Benny's from Lava Lash has slipped to 4th, followed by Mangi from Lone Wolf, Sally Locke from Chaos Bolt, Drailing from Lone Wolf, Hong Mozu Jihiwi from Shang Ming, Lai Yen N Versar from Crusader Strike, and finally Belrog from Lone Wolf. Next, we are diving into the Fury Warrior class. Let's start with yesterday's top 3. Alondo from Crusader Strike in the Guild AL and Pals held the top spot with a DPS of 599.5 and an item level of 43. Mickey from Gao Lang in the Guild, Do Ya Plus, was a close 2nd with a DPS of 586.5 and the same item level. Melahard from Living Flame rounded out the top 3 with a DPS of 561.1 and an item level of 42. Fast forward to today, Ahondo is still reigning supreme, maintaining his DPS and item level. Mickey is also holding steady, keeping his 2nd place spot, but we've got a new face in the top 3. Morfang from Living Flame in the Guild Nemesis, who's edged out Melhard with a DPS of 561.2 and an item level of 44. As for the rest of the top 10, Melahad has slipped to 4th place, followed by Atasmos from Lone Wolf in 5th. Zolpi, Bankai Master, Monkai News, Sippy, all from Living Flame, are holding the middle ground, with placements from 6th to 9th respectively. And finally, Jervis from Crusader Strike rounds out the top 10. Lastly, we're focusing on the Protection Warrior class. Let's dive right in. Holding steady at the top of the leaderboard is Sajijeo from Godogan New Dari in Korea, still boasting a DPS of 395.0 and an item level close behind also from Godrogan Nugdane in Korea, is Mogpo with a DPS of 394.4 and an item level of 43. Rounding out the top 3 is duo Luo Zai Su from Shengming Li Weian in Taiwan, maintaining a DPS of 390.1 and an item level of 43. Now, let's quickly run through the rest of today's top 10. At number 4, we have Mentor from Wild Growth in the US, followed by Day 6 from Crusader Strike in the US at number 5. Wednesday from Living Flame in the EU is at number 6, with Lightning Gaia from Yi Zhengwei at number 7. The final 3 spots are held by Epia, Garlish, and Latzos, all from Wild Growth in the EU. That's it for today's Protection Warrior leaderboard. That is it for March 18th, 2024, update for Season of Discovery's Warcraft logs. Please provide comments on if you would like different comparisons or any other feedback you may have. Thank you all for watching.